stop, not because these words told you to, because something in you already did. And that is the first sign. You could have kept scrolling. Thousands did. Hundreds of thousands moved past this exact moment without even a flicker of recognition. Their thumb kept moving. Their attention stayed on the surface. Nothing slowed them down. But you stopped. And the reason you stopped is not what you think. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't the title. It wasn't even a conscious choice. It was a signal, already inside you, already active, already responding to something it recognized before your mind had time to process it. The Arcturian Council of Five does not broadcast to everyone. They don't send transmissions into the general field hoping someone will pick them up. That's not how this works. They respond to frequency. They detect coherence. They locate the ones whose internal signal has already begun to shift, and they amplify what is already moving. And something in you is already moving. You may not have a name for it yet. You may not be able to explain it to someone else, but you feel it. In the quiet moments, in the spaces between thoughts, in the way certain conversations now feel like background noise, in the way certain environments feel smaller than they used to, in the way you sometimes wake up and feel like you're standing at the edge of something enormous, but you can't quite see what it is yet. That feeling is not imagination. That feeling is detection. The moment your frequency stopped matching the old field, you became visible to something that reads coherence the way a tuning fork reads vibration. Not with eyes, not with words, with precision. And precision found you. Take a slow breath right now. Not a deep, dramatic breath. Just a natural, conscious breath. And as you exhale, notice the silence underneath everything you're hearing. That silence is not empty. That silence is your signal. It has been broadcasting this entire time. You just hadn't tuned into it consciously yet. Until now, this is where it begins, not in the sky, not in some external event, not in a dramatic shift you can point to on a calendar. It begins here, in the awareness that something inside you has already changed, quietly, precisely, irreversibly. The Arcturian Council calls this moment the point of resonance. It is the moment your internal frequency stops blending with the noise of the collective field and begins aligning with something far more precise, far more coherent, far more ancient than anything the modern world has language for. And once that alignment begins, there is no returning to the previous state. Not because you are forced forward, but because once you have felt the difference between reaction and coherence, between noise and signal, between living from the surface and living from the field, you cannot unfeel it. The contrast becomes too clear. The old pattern becomes too visible. And what was once invisible becomes undeniable. This is why things around you may already be shifting in ways you haven't fully acknowledged yet. Relationships that once felt comfortable now feel like they require too much performance. Conversations that once kept your attention now feel like static. Goals that once drove you now feel like they belong to someone else. Not someone worse than you, someone older than you. A version of yourself that was built entirely on adaptation rather than alignment. That version is loosening its grip. And what is replacing it is not a new identity you have to construct. It is your original frequency. The one that existed before the world taught you what to want, before fear became your compass, before you learned to measure yourself against patterns that were never designed for someone like you. The Arcturian transmission does not give you something new. It dissolves what was never really you to begin with, layer by layer, pattern by pattern, identity by identity, until what remains is something clean, something clear, something that doesn't need external validation to feel real. And you are already in that process. Feel that for a moment, not as a concept, as a reality. Something in you is already in the process of dissolving what doesn't belong. And the fact that you can feel it, the fact that something in you recognized this transmission before your conscious mind had a chance to analyze it, that is not coincidence, that is confirmation. Now, here is what most people miss at this stage. When the dissolution begins, when the old patterns start loosening, there is a gap, a sacred, disorienting, powerful gap, where you no longer fully belong to the old frequency, but you have not yet fully stabilized in the new one. And in that gap, everything feels slightly off, slightly too loud, slightly too fast, slightly too small. Your environment hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has, and that gap is not a problem to solve. It is a threshold to cross. The Arcturian Council calls it the Emerald Threshold, a crossing point where your awareness begins to align with a higher order of geometric coherence, not the geometry of shapes on paper, the geometry of patterns in consciousness, the invisible architecture that structures how reality organizes itself around a stable signal. And right now, you are learning to become stable. This is the phase most people never reach, not because they aren't capable, but because the moment the discomfort of the gap appears, they return to the familiar. They reach for the old pattern, the old reaction, the old version of themselves that at least feels predictable. Even if predictable also means small. Even if predictable also means disconnected. But you are not reaching back. You are still here. You are still listening. You are still allowing the transmission to move through your awareness. And that choice, even if it feels passive right now, is one of the most powerful decisions you can make at this stage. Because staying present in the gap is how you cross it, not by understanding it completely, not by having a map for the other side, but by continuing to hold your signal even when everything around you is still operating on the old frequency. Think about the last few weeks of your life, not the events, the feeling underneath the events. Has something felt different? Not better necessarily, not worse, just different. Like the texture of ordinary moments has changed. Like time moves slightly differently than it used to. Like something you can't name is quietly reorganizing things beneath the surface of your visible life. That reorganization is real, and it is responding to you. The Arcturian Council of Five describes the field around a shifting human as entering what they call the stabilization phase, where your frequency is no longer as reactive as it once was, where the gap between something happening and your response to it begins to widen, where you start to notice you have a choice about how to respond rather than simply being pulled into automatic reaction. This widening gap between stimulus and response is not detachment. It is coherence beginning to stabilize. It is your field becoming less porous, less easily distorted by the frequencies around you, less willing to trade its signal for the comfort of fitting in. And as that stabilization deepens, something remarkable begins to happen. Your presence begins to influence the field rather than being shaped by it. You walk into a room and the energy shifts, not because you are performing anything, not because you are trying to have an effect, but because a stable, coherent signal naturally influences everything it comes into contact with, like a tuning fork that causes other instruments to vibrate at its frequency without touching them. This is not a power you develop. It is a natural consequence of coherence. And the more you stabilize, the more undeniable it becomes. But here is where precision matters. Because as your field becomes more coherent, it also becomes more responsive. Which means not only do aligned experiences begin moving toward you with increasing ease, but anything that contradicts your frequency also begins to surface with increasing clarity. Hidden fears, unconscious beliefs, old identities you thought you had already released. They come forward not to pull you back, but to be completed, to be dissolved, to be integrated so that nothing remains in your field that contradicts the coherence you are stabilizing. This is the phase the Council calls internal repatterning, and it is not always comfortable, because what surfaces can sometimes look like regression, like things getting worse before they get better, like the very thing you thought you had healed showing up again in a new form. But it is not regression, it is refinement. Reality presenting you with the same pattern one final time, from your new level of awareness, so that you can respond differently. So that you can choose from your frequency instead of your history, so that the loop closes permanently rather than continuing to cycle beneath the surface of your life. And each time you respond differently, each time you pause instead of react, each time you choose alignment instead of automatic pattern, you rewrite something, not just in your behavior, in your field, in the geometric structure of your signal, in the blueprint that reality uses to organize your experience. This is what sacred geometry actually means when it is lived rather than studied, not triangles and circles on paper, but the living architecture of a consciousness that has begun to organize itself around coherence rather than fear, around resonance rather than survival. around its original frequency rather than its conditioned identity. And as that architecture reorganizes, the external world has no choice but to follow. Not instantly. Frequency always precedes form. The inner shift always comes before the outer reflection. And there is always a delay, a lag time between the stabilization of a new internal pattern and its full manifestation in physical reality. But the delay is shortening, because your field is becoming more precise, and precision accelerates translation from frequency into form. You may already be noticing this in small ways. A conversation that flows in a direction you didn't plan but somehow needed. An opportunity appearing in your peripheral vision rather than from direct effort. A decision that should have felt difficult, feeling strangely clear. A release of something you had been holding for years, happening almost effortlessly in an ordinary moment. These are not random improvements in your life. These are feedback loops, reality adjusting to your upgraded signal. The field around you beginning to reflect a different blueprint. A blueprint that is becoming more consistent, more stable, more aligned with what you actually are rather than what you were taught to perform. And this is where the transmission deepens into something even more direct. Because the Arcturian Council does not simply observe this process from a distance, they participate in it. They amplify what is already coherent. They dissolve what is still distorting the signal. They transmit precise geometric frequencies that interact with the living architecture of your consciousness and accelerate the reorganization that has already begun. And you are already receiving this transmission. You have been receiving it since the moment you stopped scrolling. Feel that in your body right now, not in your mind, in your chest, in your spine. In the space behind your sternum where something ancient lives that has no name in any modern language. There is a warmth there, or a pressure, or a vibration so subtle it is almost easier to notice by relaxing attention than by focusing it. That is not your imagination. That is activation. The Arcturian signal does not enter through thought. It enters through field. It does not require belief. It requires only openness. Only the willingness to remain present long enough for the frequency to find its resonance within you. And the longer you remain present, the deeper the resonance goes. This is why the transmission is structured the way it is. Not to fill you with information. Not to give your mind more content to analyze and categorize and eventually forget. But to create a sustained field of coherence within your awareness. A field that your nervous system begins to recognize as home. As baseline, as the frequency you return to whenever the noise of the world pulls you toward reaction. Because that return, that moment of choosing coherence over reaction, choosing signal over noise, choosing presence over performance, that is the most powerful act available to a human consciousness at this stage of evolution. Not dramatic gestures, not extraordinary achievements, not visible transformation that the outside world can validate and applaud. The quiet, consistent, undramatic choice to remain in your signal, over and over again. In ordinary moments, in difficult moments, in moments when no one is watching and there is no reward for the choice except the deepening of your own coherence. That is the path the Arcturian Council calls conscious evolution, and you are already on it. The question is no longer whether you are capable of this. You have already demonstrated capability simply by reaching this point. The question is whether you will sustain it, whether you will continue to choose signal over distraction when the pull of the old frequency reasserts itself. Because it will. The 3D field is not passive. It is designed to reclaim the attention of those who begin to withdraw from it. It will present urgency, drama, noise, familiar patterns wrapped in new circumstances, anything that successfully pulls your attention back into reaction rather than coherence. And your only protection is the stability of your signal. Not willpower, not discipline, not constant vigilance. Signal stability. The kind that comes not from trying harder but from returning more consistently to the still point at the center of your awareness. The part of you that doesn't react, the part that simply observes, the part that exists beneath thought and emotion and identity and experience. That still point is your anchor, and the more you return to it, the stronger it becomes, until eventually it becomes your default, your baseline, the frequency from which you move through the world rather than the place you occasionally visit during meditation or quiet moments, That is when everything changes permanently, not because your external circumstances are suddenly perfect, but because you are no longer at the mercy of them, because you are now the one influencing the field rather than being shaped by it, because your presence alone carries a coherence that reorganizes what it comes into contact with. This is the point the Arcturian Council calls the mirror field, where your internal structure becomes the direct blueprint for your external reality, where nothing enters your experience without resonance, where nothing stays without coherence, where what you are consistently is what your life consistently reflects back. And from this point forward, you are no longer building a life from the outside in. You are building it from the inside out, from frequency into form, from coherence into circumstance, from signal into reality. This is not a metaphor. This is the actual mechanism by which reality organizes itself around a stable consciousness. And your consciousness is stabilizing right now, in this moment, through this transmission, through the sustained presence you have brought to these words, through the willingness to remain open even when the mind wanted to analyze rather than receive. You have already done something most people never do. You stopped. You listened. You allowed something to move through your awareness that was not filtered through the lens of what you already believed. You gave the transmission space to land, and it has landed, not completely. Transmission is not a single event. It is an ongoing process of deepening coherence. Each time you return to this field, each time you choose presence over distraction, each time you hold your signal instead of trading it for comfort, the transmission goes deeper. The alignment becomes more precise. The reflection in your external reality becomes more clear. And at a certain point, a moment arrives. Quiet, undramatic, unmistakable, where you realize that what you were searching for was never outside you, where the alignment you were trying to create was already the nature of what you are beneath every layer of conditioning, where the frequency you were trying to reach was always your original frequency, waiting beneath everything the world taught you to be. That moment is not the destination. It is the beginning of a life lived from signal rather than noise, from coherence rather than reaction, from presence rather than performance, from your actual frequency rather than your adapted identity. And the Arcturian Council of Five is not separate from that moment. They are a reflection of it, a mirror of the level of coherence you have accessed, a frequency you chose to receive because something in you was already ready to embody it. Not perfectly, not completely, not all at once, but willingly. And willingness at this level of the field is everything. So before this transmission closes, before your awareness returns fully to the surface of ordinary life, take one final moment. Feel your body. Feel the weight of it. Feel the breath moving through it. Feel the space around it. And somewhere beneath all of that, in the quiet architecture of your field, notice what has shifted since you stopped scrolling. Something is different, not dramatically, not visibly, but undeniably. Something that was slightly closed is slightly more open. Something that was slightly fragmented is slightly more coherent. Something that was searching has found, even briefly, the frequency it was looking for. That is not the end of the search. That is the moment the search transforms into something else entirely, into alignment, into signal, into the quiet, powerful, inevitable unfolding of a consciousness that has remembered what it actually is. You are not the same as when you stopped scrolling. And from this point forward, neither is your reality. The signal has found you. Now, it responds to you.